So we had the budget documentation, but day two after a budget, it's all about the kind of post-match analysis. So we hear from the Resolution Foundation, from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, all these pointy heads, all the think tanks basically tell us, do the numbers add up? What was actually going on beneath the surface here? And here's the big picture here, okay? So this is basically showing you the extent to which things changed as a result of all sorts of different factors. Do you remember in the run-up to this budget, there was so much talk about how the Office for Budget Responsibility had changed its productivity forecast. This is what we were briefed, by the way. They changed their productivity forecast so much that it was going to raise the deficit, and so the government was going to have to step in with tax rises, maybe even income tax rises. Well, here's what actually happened, because we now have the numbers. The OBR forecast changes, they did come out and they said, look, the economy's not doing as well. So as a result, you've got higher deficits in the coming years, okay? But look at those bars, okay? So that, in particular, okay, look over here. Maybe we'll zoom in a little bit. 2029-30, look at that bar. That is the impact of the OBR. Now consider the impact of the other stuff, the U-turns by the government. So look at these bars. Actually, the U-turns by the government, whether it's winter fuel or everything else, actually increase the deficit by more than the OBR stuff. So when you hear the government say, no, it's all because the OBR has reconsidered things because of Brexit and because of the last government and everything else, it's not true. It's mostly the U-turns that they're needing to pay for at the moment. And when I talk about paying for them, there's also the U-turns, there's also the giveaways, so extra money going out and benefits, particularly the two-child policy being abolished there. You can see as a result of all those policies, the amount of extra borrowing that would happen goes up. And then it's not, obviously, that's only one half of the story because you've got the spending, but on the other hand, you've got the tax rises. And the whole point here is the government is taxing in order to fund this extra spending. And there's two things to note about this, okay? When you look at the state of what we're talking about here, first of all, the borrowing in the first few years, there's more borrowing. So when you hear the government say, look, there's less borrowing, no, actually, this particular budget raised the amount of borrowing, certainly in the first few years. It's only in the final year that that's offset by extra taxes. But this is where things get awkward, because what's also happening around then? That's an election year. So the idea that the government is going to have a massive amount of extra taxes hitting people at the very same time that it's going to the polls, well, you might ask questions about whether that's actually going to happen, but we'll have to see about that. When you add on everything, that's kind of how it looks. Worth just saying, okay, the other thing we tend to get on the kind of day two is this kind of thing. And this is looking not just at different years in the future, but this is a really important thing, and I'll just add on one of the things to show you. This is looking at the extent to which different policies are taking money out of your pocket or putting it into it, going from the poorest, so lowest income households, through to the richest. And if you just look here, this is those frozen allowances. So this is the biggest tax rise that we had in this budget. And you can see this is kind of logical, isn't it? The richer you are, the more money you're earning, the more you're paying in this tax. So the more this impacts you. So that is the impact of frozen allowances. So you can see it there. But frozen allowances weren't the only part. Tax rises weren't the only part of this budget. There were also some giveaways. So scrapping the two-child policy, that's money going into people's pockets. But critically, look, it's the lowest income households who benefit from that, whereas the upper income households, they're mainly just paying extra money at that point. Now, the two-child policy wasn't the only giveaway. There were other bits and pieces as well. That energy bill reduction, so everyone getting money off their energy bills, you can see, look, there's a little slice there that everyone benefits from all the way along the income spectrum. And you can see how gradually, piece by piece, this budget, you can see the impact of it. The mansion tax, did you see that? I might just kind of rewind so you can see. Look over here, particularly at the wealthiest families. The mansion tax, can you see how much of an impact it makes? It's hardly anything, isn't it? But basically, that's the point. It doesn't raise much money, but it does impact some households here at the top of the income spectrum. And I'll show you in a moment, just vividly, what's going on there. But if you take everything, all of the different measures, because there were lots of bits and pieces, it was, a big budget, then this is the big picture of it. And just look at the kind of net total of whether this was a giveaway or a takeaway, depending on how much money you're earning. And for the wealthiest families, for those who are earning the most, it was a takeaway, more money going into the exchequer, coming out of their pockets. But for poor families, it was a giveaway. And what does that mean? It means this was a progressive budget. It was taking more from the rich to give to the poor. Now, obviously, that line doesn't look quite so steep when you're looking at percentage of incomes, but this is perhaps the clearest indication of how it's comprised. But I mentioned the mansion tax a moment ago, and how maybe it wasn't quite as big of a deal in terms of raising money as you might have thought. This is just showing you, who is going to end up paying this. This is showing you across the country, or at least across England, who is living in homes, or at least who's exchanged homes for more than £2 million recently. And here's what's striking about this. Kind of getting towards 70% of all of the 2 million plus homes are in London and the South East. So it's all focused around this area. The mansion tax is all about that. And actually, we could kind of zoom in even closer, and it goes to this extreme, 23%. So getting towards a quarter of all of the 2 million plus sales in recent years were in Kensington, Chelsea, Westminster and Camden, 3 London boroughs. 3 London boroughs. So you can see this is a very concentrated policy, doesn't raise much money, but certainly affects people within those boroughs and a few other places as well. One thing that perhaps, it kind of came out in the numbers in the budget, but maybe we could focus on a little bit more, because remember, one of the government's latest targets, their pledges, is they want to get living standards increasing. I mean, I know there have been so many of these pledges over just the last few months, you could say. But one of their pledges is they want to get living standards improving over the course of this Parliament. And why do they want to do that? It's because living standards, real household disposable income, which is what we're measuring here, that's a sense of how much better off we feel we're getting each year. Last Parliament, that's the last Parliament, that included the pandemic, it included the energy price shock, was grim. It was terrible for living standards. We all got worse off. But that raises the question, where are we heading now? Because we now actually have the data from the OBR to fill in the gap and show at least where we're expected to go this time around. So have a look. Look where the bar might take us. I mean, it's definitely in positive territory, which kind of means that they meet their rule. But if you kind of draw a line back and go all the way back to 1955, save for that grim one last time around, there is no worse Parliament for living standards. So, I mean, technically meeting the rule, but I mean, frankly, it's a very low bar there. Very, very last thing, okay, because there's been so much focus in recent budgets about what the market reaction has been. It's worth just kind of giving you an update. Are investors nervous after this one? Last time they were, but have a look at this. This is just showing you, and I've done this chart a few times before, it's showing you the typical average kind of direction that UK government bonds have taken in the days after a budget. And this matters because, if they go up, often that's people saying, well, we're nervous about your country, so we're going to charge you more in interest. For instance, that's the mini budget. So, you can't forget that. Enormous rise in borrowing costs, which later came down basically when Kwasi Kwarteng was sacked. And you probably also remember the fact that after Rachel Reeves's last budget, this line went up quite a bit. It was a nerve-wracking time last autumn after her budget because she didn't leave as much headroom and people got nervous about it, all of which raises the question, how about this time, okay? Let's have a look. So this is where she is. Actually, far from going up, the line has gone down. And from her perspective, that is good news. Investors out there basically judging that as a result of this budget, as a result of what they've heard, they're happy to charge a lower rate of interest when they are lending money to the UK. So I think put it all together, and I imagine actually Rachel Reeves would probably be quite pleased with the verdict, both from think tanks and also, all importantly, from markets.